Hello, this is Connie, and in this tutorial I'll be talking about some basic ways of controlling the player camera and doing wake-up sequences in Portal. If you've played Portal, you'll know that every Portal game and every Portal mod ever has some kind of wake-up sequence, where you're on the ground and you wake up. I'll be going through some basic ways of controlling the player camera and how to set that up. I'll start simple with the point of view control entity. This is a very simple entity that functions like a camera. When it's activated, the player will see through this camera. They won't be able to control it. They'll just be seeing through it as if their eyes were the camera. So I'll just call this test view control. And there are a number of key values here. The hold time key value tells you how long the camera should stay active. If you don't want it to turn off automatically, go into the flags tab and turn on infinite hold time. You can also make it interpolate the position, which means you can make it so the camera eases from your player's head to the position of the camera. You can change the field of view, and you can change the speed and acceleration if it's connected to a track. So for example, if you were doing a tube ride. In the flags, you can set it to follow the player, which means, well, the camera will continuously look at the player. But if you don't want that and you want the camera to be looking at something else, then obviously uncheck it. I'll keep it checked here just so you can see what it looks like. And with freeze player, self-explanatory. I mean, it freezes the player. Some other things, you can make it so that it sets the FOV that you have here. You can make it so the player isn't solid. Just stuff that you can play around with. I'm just going to set up a button quickly to turn this on and we can test it. So when you set up the inputs, you want to send the enable input. That turns it on. And similarly, if you want it to turn off, send the disable input. Additionally, another thing that you can think about, there's teleport to view, which teleports your player to the position of this camera, which we'll be using later. And there's also return to eyes, which does the opposite of teleport to view. It teleports the camera to your player's eyes. But let's just test it out as it is. I will compile. If we head on over to this button that I haven't corrected the rotation of, so it's backwards, I turn it on and it activates the camera. You can't see my player model, because we're technically in first person, so our player model isn't rendering, but you can see that as I move around, the camera follows me. You cannot move the camera with your mouse. It's a completely separate thing from your own view. This is just how you get the player to see through a different camera, and if that's all you need, then that's great. If you don't want it to follow the player, but you want it to follow something else, you can also give it an entity to look at, which, you know, if you wrote in player, it would follow the player, but you can write in anything else. If you wanted the camera to follow a cube going through a vac tube or something like that, you could do that. Next, I want to talk about point view proxy. It's similar to point view control, but it allows you to move the camera with your mouse. Essentially what it does is it offsets the camera from your player. You still have control over your movement, and you have control over your camera. It's just offset depending on what the entity is configured with. Let's give this a name. Test view proxy. Nope, that's not what I want you to be. So this entity will actually allow you to specify a different entity, and that's where the player view will be translated. So over here, I have an info target, just as a test entity. So I'm going to select that as my proxy entity. And the idea is that when I activate this view proxy, the player camera will go here. And the player will still have control over their movement and will be able to move the camera around, but the movement and the camera will be separate. So if I'm moving around over there, the camera's still here and I can look around freely. So let's just quickly set this up and see what that looks like. Again, when you're setting up inputs and outputs, you want to use the enable input and the disable input when you're done with it. And let's compile. Okay, so I press this. My camera is now where that target is, and I can look around. But I'm not actually up here. I'm down there, and you can see that because my portal shots are coming from down there. This is actually used at the very start of the game when you're woken up by Wheatley. That entire sequence where you're in the motel room and it's being destroyed, you're not actually in that room. Your camera is in that room, but your player is in a simpler, boxy room. So like this, you can just have like a shot of this room. And this is what it looks like. For real. This is the room that you're actually in. And they just use some camera trickery. So in order to achieve that effect at the start of the game where you're able to move around and the camera moves with your player, but there's just an offset, all you have to do, change snap to camera to keep offset. It's pretty simple. So then your camera will start at the proxy entity, but will continue moving when you move your character. And that will let you put the camera in a separate place from your character and still allow you to move around. Now, of course, when I load this map, you can see that there is a wake-up sequence at the beginning, so I'm going to go through how to set that up. But first, the way that this is achieved is through a prop dynamic. When you have your prop dynamic, the model you want to choose will be either blackin or blackout.mdl. I'm going to choose blackout because it has a larger set of animations, whereas blackin only has one. The animations of blackout and blackin are slightly different. The exit animations, that is. The wake up animation in blackout is significantly faster and more concise, whereas in the blackin model, the wake up animation is a lot slower. So if you want to have a slower wake up animation, you're likely going to want to use blackin.mdl. When you choose this model, you'll see it's not the prettiest. I mean, it's a lot of nothing and a little pink cube. The reasoning for this is that it's actually a bunch of invisible bones, and that's what your camera is attached to. So if you look at this model in the model viewer, you can see this is our little pink cube, and this is where the player camera is. So if I use the exit 1 animation, this is the wake up animation, and you can see the player camera going from there up to above where the cube is. So the way that you align this, you want the cube side of it, which is also the origin of the model. You notice when I rotate it, it rotates around that cube. You want it to be on the side that you want your character to be facing at the end of the wake up animation. We're also going to give it a name. We're going to call it just test wake up. What you're also going to want to do is you're going to want to go to render mode and change it to don't render, because otherwise this little pink cube will show up in game, but it's just for you to reference in Hammer, so we don't want to see it in the game. Also, just in case, you might want to turn on hold animation so that the animation doesn't reset at the end. Now, we have our prop dynamic, which is the wake up animation, but we don't actually have a camera to connect to that. So, now we're going to make a view control. To make our view control, and it doesn't matter where we put it. We'll call this test wake up view control. So what we're going to do is under the parent key value, we're going to parent it to the animation, our test wake up. And we're going to use another entity. Also, when you're making your point of view control, remember to uncheck start at player and uncheck follow player and to check freeze player. And also to check infinite hold time. Because you want this view control to last until the end of the wake up animation, and you don't want the player to be able to move around during that. So just make sure that your flags look like this. Now we've parented the camera, the view control, to the wake up animation. But there's still another step. We have to both trigger the wake up animation and we need to do an extra parenting step for the camera to properly work. So I'm going to make a logic auto, which will trigger automatically at the start of the map. I will add on map spawn, test wake up view control, set parent attachment, and I will set this attachment to vehicle underscore driver underscore eyes. This is an attachment point in the model, and that is what the camera is going to attach to. We're also going to do on map spawn. We're going to select our wake up, and we're going to set animation exit 1. Exit 1 is the animation that is the wake up animation, so that's why we're choosing that animation in particular. Now on map spawn, we want to turn on the camera. So enable, and I'm going to add a slight delay of 0.1 seconds because there's a chance the player might not be fully spawned in yet. Alternatively, instead of using a logic auto, you can just put a trigger around where the player spawns, and then the player will always be spawned in when it triggers. Now the animation itself lasts about 5 to 6 seconds long. What I personally like to do is I like to assume that it lasts 6 seconds. So I'm going to select the view control again. I'm going to choose disable after a delay of 6 seconds. But we also want the player to appear where the camera ends. So also after a delay of 6 seconds, I'm going to choose teleport to view, and that will teleport the player to where the camera is after the animation. So now that we have that set up, let's see it in game. Finally, the last method of controlling the player camera I'll be going over is vehicles. Specifically, prop vehicle choreo generic. Now, you may have noticed this strange prisoner pod from Half-Life 2 that is untextured, sitting in the middle of this room. That's for a reason. I'm going to delete it, and we're going to remake it. And I'm also going to delete this button, because we need to set this up again. So, prop vehicle choreo generic is an entity that functions like a vehicle, but we're not really using it as a vehicle, we're using it as a way to control the player's camera. Essentially, it freezes the player, and it allows the player to look around, but only within certain bounds. For example, like at the end of the game, before the moonshot, where you're on the ground, and you can't turn your camera 360 degrees. It's clamped to an area. They use a vehicle to achieve that. Now, for most purposes, the models and vehicles in Portal 2 that this entity uses aren't actually very helpful. For example, the laying on the ground vehicle that is at the end of the game is pretty specifically for laying on the ground, and the script it uses sets the field of view, it clamps the screen very specifically, and otherwise might not be super useful. So what I tend to do when I use this entity is I use the prisoner pod from Half-Life 2, and in fact, when you spawn this entity, the Half-Life 2 prisoner pod is the default model. Now, the issue, it's the Half-Life 2 prisoner pod, so it's not in Portal by default, meaning you're gonna have to copy the model from Half-Life 2 into Portal if you own it. Which is unfortunate, But the reason is because it actually uses the same attachment point that we see in our black in and black out models. The attachment vehicle driver eyes, which we attached to in the logic earlier. The issue is that there's no easily alignable or very clear model in Portal 2 that lets you know where this attachment is. The black in and black out models have it, but they start on the ground, and you have no indication of knowing where exactly this is in normal Hammer. In Hammer++, that's not the case, but we're talking about normal Hammer here, which otherwise would make this incredibly tedious to work with because you're essentially working blind. So, I suggest, if you have Half-Life 2, to port the Prisoner Pod, because the Prisoner Pod has that attachment point, but it's a lot easier to know where it is. It's just right here. And you can see the whole model. It's about player height. It's just a lot simpler to work with, I find. So let's just name this Test Vehicle. Again, like our blackout model, you're likely going to want to make it invisible. This model, or this entity, doesn't have a render mode key value, but it has an alpha key value for some reason. I don't know why. That's Valve. So what you would do is you would just set the alpha to 0. For the sake of testing and for the sake of being able to illustrate what's happening, I'm going to leave it on for this tutorial, just so we can see the model. But in a map, you're likely going to want to hide the model. Now, the way that the vehicle works is it references a vehicle script. There are a few of these scripts in Portal 2. You can find these scripts in the Portal 2 directory under Portal 2, Scripts, Vehicles. And 2 of them are for the Super 8, 2 of them are for the Super 8 map, and 2 of them are for the ending, and then that one called Goose X is actually mine from a few years ago. So don't worry about that. For simplicity's sake, we're just going to use player_down.txt. So I'm going to put that in here. Just because it's an existing script that we have access to, and we don't have to do any scripting ourselves. But otherwise, if you look at this script, you can see yaw min, yaw max, pitch min, pitch max, and FOV. So theoretically, all you need to do is copy this file under a different name and modify these values to what you want. For the sake of illustrating what's possible with this entity, I'm going to turn on Can the Player Shoot, which lets the player shoot. This is how they let you shoot at the moon at the end of the game. And I'm also going to turn off collisions, not solid, for this entity, because otherwise the vehicle is going to block your shots, and it won't matter. Now, in order to trigger this entity, you want to make an output. I'm just going to use this button. And you want to do Enter Vehicle Immediate. Enter Vehicle means it will do the whole entering vehicle animation that you see in Half-Life 2, which most cases is probably not what you want, and it is a little broken in Portal 2. If you want to use it, go ahead, but Enter Vehicle Immediate simply teleports your view into the vehicle right away. And then, there's no way to exit the vehicle except with another output, so I'm just going to, for the sake of testing, do another output, exit vehicle, after 15 seconds. So we'll see what it's like for 15 seconds, and then it'll kick us out. And now that we have this set up and we have it set to the player down script included with Portal 2, I'm going to compile the map. So, we can see here, this is our vehicle. So theoretically, when we press the button, we should be looking this direction and should be able to look around within some limits. And look at that. It did in fact work. Now, because this is the script from the end of the game, it has a really low field of view, and you're likely going to want to make a script that is not this zoomed in. But as you can see, it lets you look around, you can shoot, it's functional, and when you exit the vehicle, it doesn't exit the vehicle immediately like you do when you enter. I couldn't tell you why there isn't an exit vehicle immediate, but it just ejects you to the nearest safe space, or the nearest space that has enough room for you. So, those are some methods of controlling the player camera in Portal 2, and some methods that the game itself uses to control your camera. I hope that was very helpful, or at least helpful in some capacity, and we'll see you in whatever tutorial you watch next, if you happen to watch any more. They're very good. I do recommend them if you're willing. Yeah, thank you.